Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very, very accomplished individual from Chicago, USA, Mr. Robert Jordan. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ash. I'm honored to be with you.
Thank you. Robert is the Chief Executive Officer of InterimExecs, and he's an author. And all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's an author of 2 books, Right Leader, Right Time, Discover Your Leadership Style for a Winning Career and Company. And the second one is How They Did It, Billion-Dollar Insights from the Heart of America. And we will speak about his books. So Robert, before we speak about InterimExecs and your books, tell me a little bit about your own journey in brief.
My journey is highly entrepreneurial, Ash.
Mm-hmm.
I was in business school, graduate school in the US, was a little bored and dropped out to launch what became the first magazine in the world that covered online services and internet.
Wow.
I did that for a number of years and sold it to a big publisher. The more full story about that is any mistake you can make in business, I made it.
Okay.
And I guess in the end lived to tell about it.
Mm.
In the end, of course, because the internet exploded after the creation of the World Wide Web, I could do no wrong. And so the growth was very fast. It put me on the Inc. 500 list, which was fastest growing companies in the US.
Okay.
So I did that. And then afterward was kind of casting around for what I was going to do with the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And you know the Zen expression, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Mm-hmm.
Fortuitously, I met someone in the US and he had this very weird job title. Mm-hmm. He was an interim CEO.
Okay.
And that, I didn't understand what that was, but then he handed me his new business card. He always had different business cards, and he handed me a new card that said CEO of Yahoo.
Mm-hmm.
This was at the start of the
Amazing.
internet revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was in the industry, we knew Yahoo going public on zero revenue, not zero earnings, but zero revenue was revolutionary. And I basically said, I said to this guy, I said, you're now my mentor, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be like you, be an interim CEO. And so that started me on a new career. And when social networks came around, Facebook and MySpace and LinkedIn, we started wondering how many people in the world had this kind of weird job calling of wanting to be an interim CFO or CEO or CIO. And so we formed an organization called InterimExecs, which became a matchmaker around the world between organizations and executives who were choosing their new careers to be project-based.
Fascinating, fascinating. So tell me a little bit more, how do you determine which set of executives you want to bring on board into InterimExecs, and how do you matchmake them?
It's a great question. In the past decade, we've been approached by about 7,000 executives from 50 countries. And that will cause you to become more systemic, more process-oriented. And so we developed ranking and scoring and screening. And that was very, that was a learning experience for us, because when you are separating out the majority from the top 1 or 2 or 3%, there are remarkable differences. And that's what led us to do the book, Right Leader, Right Time, which I know we're going to talk about, because the majority of executives showing up, Ash, they were having career journeys that you and I would describe as okay or good, but not great. And the flip side of that was the top 1, 2, 3%. Oh my gosh, these are exceptional, extraordinary leaders who were just crushing it. I mean, they were causing remarkable results in the world, and there was a vast difference. And I know you're driven by mission in terms of your show, that you want to have impact with young people. early in their careers. And that was the exact same drive for us
Wow.
with the book, which was a bit of a cautionary note that we had seen from the majority of these leaders where it wasn't so great, and that there were lessons for people earlier on in their careers.
Fascinating. And for my viewers and listeners, could you give me an example, without names, of course, of some individuals who you matchmaked and how they made a difference in a company?
Sure. So around a third of the time, organizations showing up are in flat out crisis. There's something going dramatically wrong, and they need help. It generally is that there is some absence of leadership at the top. And we can name names. In a lot of cases, clients give us permission. So for example, there's a family in the US and they grow most of the grapes that people eat, not grapes for making wine, but what are called table grapes. And they had a packaging company to ship the grapes around the US, and the company had failed. The equipment had broken down. They'd had to fire 150 workers. Mysteriously, the former executive had left, and there were losses no one could explain. So they were in bad shape. And we had, among all these executives, a remarkable CEO who had accomplished a number of turnarounds. And within about 8 weeks, he had gotten the equipment back in good shape. He had rehired the 150 people. He had convinced their customers to come back. It was nothing short of extraordinary. And so this family, was very grateful that there was that kind of resource at hand. And they didn't have to go through some long permanent search to find a permanent executive. There was an instantly available, wonderful CEO who wanted to do this as a project and didn't need to stay there the rest of his career.
Wow. Great example. Thank you. And when I was reading about you, Robert, there is a process which you call your RED, which is your Rapid Executive Deployment Program. Tell me a little bit more about your RED program.
Yes, Red Team. So Red Team was the designation we gave to this top 1% and 2% of CEOs and CFOs and CIOs, these leaders we were seeing and continue to see every day, that these are extraordinary leaders producing remarkable results. So for example, somebody shows up and they were at a division of a company and they took their division from 100 million in sales to 500 million in 4 years. That's a remarkable result. Or for example, someone who could save a company and save hundreds or thousands of jobs. And that for us would qualify as extraordinary. What we tended to see more, what did not qualify for Red Team, would be individuals where, they might have been at a company 5-10 years and they don't really have much to point to in terms of what actually happened on their watch. They were there, nothing perhaps blew up, but nothing went particularly right. And that was more into this category of what was mediocre.
Well, fascinating. And when you deploy a Red Team, is it that you've got an interim CEO, an interim CFO, an interim CHRO, an interim CMO, and so on, or is it just as the need arises for every organization?
Just as the need arises in an organization. An organization may need a CFO. It could be a CEO. Sometimes it's a full team. If a large company, for example, is going through a recapitalization or a spinoff in particular, in the news these days, Ash, there are a lot of corporations spinning off divisions. And in a lot of cases, there is no management team going with it. Those executives are staying with the parent company. And so who's going to run the show? Who's going to keep the lights on the first day that it is a separate company? That's a great use case for what, if you could call this project interim fractional executives. This is now a career calling around the world.
Correct.
It's not going away.
No, absolutely not. I mean, at a much more junior level is the gig economy, where people are just doing everything. So I think you're doing something absolutely incredible. But one more question I have, and that is that, when you send in your red team or some members of the red team, they basically have two tasks. One is to put out the fires and get the company back again on track. But the second is also to groom a set of new leaders who they can hand over to. What is the process you follow to groom, and how long do you take to be able to hand over?
Well, that's a great question, and you are right. In many cases, that project-based or interim executive is responsible for the next permanent hire. That can be recruiting from the outside, and there could easily be an executive recruitment firm that has been hired to go do that. And so the executive or team is working with them to accomplish that. And in a lot of places around the world, it's necessary because it is not easy to find the right permanent person for the other thing, though, is mentoring to get someone who's younger in the organization up to speed. And there you see all flavors of, I guess in a way you could call it player coach, right? Because in many sports, you just have the coach is on the sidelines, and that's it. Interim in a way is player coach, which is there is partially an active role, and active meaning making decisions, not just being a consultant on the sidelines, but being empowered by the board of directors, the management team to make decisions. And at the same point, this coaching role to be looking at the next generation, at people who are already there in their roles, and they're just not matured enough in their leadership. And so you see a lot of technique around what it is to help that person get more experience and more confidence.
Very interesting. So, Robert, let's now talk about your book, Right Leader, Right Time, Discover Your Leadership Style for a Winning Career in Company. But before I ask you about the book, I'm assuming it's available on Amazon?
Yes, all the usual places.
Okay, so I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Robert Jordan's book, Right Leader, Right Time, Discover Your Leadership Style for a Winning Career in Company. And I'm going to go and check it out myself as well. So now tell me about your book, and what was your hypothesis when you wrote it?
So, Ash, as I was saying before, the disturbing thing was that the majority of executives showing up from 50 countries, their career journeys were okay, but not great. And if you could sum it up in one reason, it would be trying to be all things to all people.
Right.
And for all of us, if your friend's describing, for example, their career, and you think that that's the way it's going, if you said that to them, most people are just going to be in denial, like, no, it's not that way. But it's not focused. The opposite of that is when you look at exceptional, extraordinary leaders, they're incredibly focused, and their career path and their journey is something that you can clearly see. Now, this is easy to say. In your own career, it's very hard to do. Because in the beginning, you need the job, you need the money. Your family is like, listen, you've got to succeed here, right? You're not in any position to think more deeply in the beginning about, gee, how am I going to focus for my most successful career? But what we have observed is that over time, exceptional leaders tend to reject more of what is not for their highest and best use. And that is something that takes your career journey, and that is something you can only accomplish over time, kind of step by step. And I'd be curious, because you are incredibly accomplished, Ash, both in your corporate career and now with your program. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. You're so right about leadership. But I want to keep on talking to you about your book. So my next question is, tell me about your FABS if I have the term right, leadership assessment program.
Yes, so that among these exceptional leaders, one of the key things we observed was that there are 4 leadership styles that help cause them to be excellent. We coined this phrase leadership style to refer to a person's approach and system and process. And if those are new words for your listeners in terms of what do you mean with leadership, well, you can see this in successful leaders. So let me give you an example. We shorthand do call it FABS. FAB stands for fixer, artist, builder, strategist.
Ah, wonderful.
Fixer, artist, builder, strategist.
Yeah.
So fixer is the energy. It is the kind of leader that has to run into the burning building.
Correct.
Time after time. They love saving organizations.
Now,
as you and I are recording this, Ash, in the world, something has happened called the failure of FTX, a crypto platform that affected millions of people around the world. When FTX failed, a court appointed a new CEO named John Ray, who it would not be a surprise to learn that prior to FTX, he was at Enron, which was a major blow up before that. And so that CEO, John Ray, is what we would call a fixer. He is completely wired to run into the burning building time after time. And that's where he gets his energy. So to be clear with your listeners, we're not trying to pigeonhole anyone to say you're just one of these things. All leaders bring all of their capabilities to bear to cause their best performance. What we are saying is that over time, exceptional leaders tend to exhibit a dominant style or a dominant and a secondary style. So for example, because I've run a company for a long time, I have to solve problems every day.
Correct.
But I don't get my energy off of that. It's not like every day if there's a problem, it's like, oh, goody, I get to do this. That's not it. But with a fixer, it is. And with a fixer, once they have solved that major problem, issue, whatever it is, it takes a year, 2 years. Now FTX is going to take a generation, but you know, with a fixer, when that problem is solved, they need to move to a new problem.
Very interesting.
Got to be a new problem for them. They cannot go back to a steady state maintenance mode kind of role.
Fascinating. And you know, since you've been working with leaders and have been studying leadership for such a long time, what are some of the key changing trends you have seen in leadership over the years?
Well, you know, a little earlier you referred to gig economy, and this is a major change in the world that, you know, we all now see, and this has now completely invaded the C-suite. And so the sense of freedom that many people have, and it offers a lot of opportunity around the world for people to structure their lives and their careers in a completely different way that does not involve full-time employment, you know, with one employer where it's like, I'm going to stay there my entire life. That ship sailed. That's kind of gone for most people around the world. There is much more freedom. And so that trend towards freedom is now completely within the C-suite as well. When I used to say this, you know, 20 years ago, you know, business friends looked at me like I was just crazy. I was insane. Like, sure, you can have operations around the world, and a U.S. company, you know, can have their innovations center in Delhi, but you know, not the C-suite. Well, now it's the C-suite too.
Well said. Well said. My next question to you is on the pandemic. And I've spoken to many, many leaders from around the world, and they say that probably the most difficult time for them as leaders has been the pandemic. They've had to keep their flock together. They've had to keep the bottom lines shored up, and they have to deliver to shareholders. What are your perspectives?
I think the demands on leadership have never been higher. You know, if your organization was centralized within an office or a series of offices, then you could feel as the leader, at least you had that, you know, what Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Habits, he called personal span of control. And so you could have this sense of personal relationship and you could rely on that and build trust between people because you could see each other and know what you were working on. And so, you know, that the new trend of remote work, work from home, from wherever, accelerated because of the pandemic and increased the demands on leadership. It is interesting, though, because there's research coming out that people that feel more of a sense of freedom and agency over their own work tend to feel more connected and more in alignment with corporate mission as that freedom goes up, even if they're remote. And so the feeling, you know, that we can all have as leaders is, I need my entire team together. But the reality is that for a lot of workers, they feel more of the sense of connection if they could be remote. And there's even evidence that there's higher productivity.
Correct.
With that. So it's counterintuitive. And this makes for a great challenge. And if I could throw out one other thing, Ash, this thing holding up a phone, you know, one of the greatest epidemics in the world is distraction. Distraction. It is that we're getting our dopamine rush from our phone 200 times a day. And if you want to do something that's going to stop your deep thinking, you know, your ability as a leader to collect yourself and to have these quiet moments to think more broadly and to do that, well, the enemy there is distraction for you and your entire team.
Fascinating. So, Robert, I have time for two more questions. My next question to you is on culture. You know, you live in an incredibly diverse, culturally diverse country. And you were just telling me that, you know, when you started looking for people from InterimExecs, you got requests from 50 different countries. Now, companies have different cultures, societies have different cultures, countries have different cultures. My question to you is, how does culture impact leadership?
You're reminding me, Ash, of Peter Drucker's famous line, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Yes. We have a related thing we said from the book we did called How They Did It, which was a series of Q&A interviews with champion company founders, which is that attitude trumps skill all day long. Your attitude is far more important. Culture is, to your point, vitally important. I will tell you one thing that, you know, among what we call strategist leadership style, strategist is a leader of complex or large organization. It is one of the dominant things on their minds, which is culture. But it was interesting to learn that most strategist leaders, they do not view culture as a set in stone thing within an organization. That a number of those leaders would like take it on as mission that they had an ability to influence that. That's interesting because you think that in any organization where there's more than a couple people, there's an ethos, there is a culture, and that it can be molded. One of the other words those leaders use a lot is cadence. And that in organizations, there's this heartbeat, there's this syncopation, there's a heartbeat to the board of directors, there is a heartbeat to the marketing department, to operations, to finance, and that it is incumbent on these leaders to think about how are you quickening the pace, the cadence of this organization. The overall answer I'd have in culture, though, is that, like, for what we do with InterimExecs, you have to be incredibly sensitive to that. And ultimately, it does not matter. It does not matter what level of skill you are bringing in terms of leadership. Chemistry and culture is far more important. And that is beyond my humble abilities or humble team to figure out. All you can do is set the table.
Well said.
For that and let everyone decide.
Well said. Thank you. What a great response. And my last question to you, Robert, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your incredible journey, your deep understanding of people, leadership, companies, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from your own journey and from our conversation?
It's a great question. We had a quote in the book, Ash, just because you have a song to sing doesn't mean you don't have to learn how to sing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd encourage your listeners on their career journeys to take moments where you listen to this, the still small voice in you,
Mm-hmm.
which is telling you one thing over another.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of decisions you make in your career, think of that word decision. Decision comes from Latin, which is to kill off.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so in cultures around the world, we hear this phrase FOMO, fear of missing out.
Correct.
Well, the opposite is that in your career, it's going to be unique to you. And that in your journey, you're going to be enough for it, but you have to be able to listen. You have to have time to listen to figure out why it is choice A over B or C over D. And if you can do that more and more, you gain more confidence on the journey. And with more self-knowledge, you're having more authentic conversations with the people around you. And that's going to cause you more success and more success for your team.
Fascinating. And on that note, Robert, and your amazing words, which one of the things I picked up was listen to the small voice inside you, because it's almost like listen to your own conscience before you decide to do anything. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own incredible journey, about InterimExecs. I mean, I think you picked up something which was a need and created InterimExecs well before the world even thought about it. Thank you for talking to me about your rapid executive development program. Thank you also for talking to me about your book, Right Leader, Right Time, Discover Your Leadership Style for a Winning Career in Company. Thank you for talking to me about your FABS leadership assessment program. What I liked was your example you gave me about the fixer, the artist, the builder, and the strategist. Thank you also for talking to me at such length about culture. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you, Ash. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.